Penguin Random House Audio presents Mr. Putin, Operative in the Kremlin, New and Expanded, by Fiona Hill and Clifford G. Gaddy. Read for you by Ellen Archer. Publisher's Note. This book is the revised and considerably expanded version of the first edition of Mr. Putin, Operative in the Kremlin, which the authors finished writing in September 2012 and was published in 2013. The original manuscript was the result of a long-standing collaboration between Fiona Hill and Clifford Gaddy as colleagues at the Brookings Institution, dating to the beginning of Mr. Putin's presidency in 2000. Fiona Hill researched and wrote the additional material for this second edition, which moves the narrative frame of the original book from its focus on the Russian domestic scene to the international arena. Between the launch of the first edition in early 2013 and September 2014, Fiona Hill collected and analyzed new source material and embarked on a series of international research trips to conduct supplemental interviews with analysts, policymakers, government officials, and private sector representatives on the key themes of the book. Clifford Gaddy contributed new material and conclusions from two separate research projects on the reform of the Russian military and the evolution of Russia's new military doctrine, and on the state of the Russian economy. The book was written between June and September 2014 with the help and hard work of Brookings Senior Research Assistant Hannah Thoburn. Hannah was a genuine collaborator on both editions of the book, carrying out painstaking work on Russian source material and playing an essential role in all aspects of the manuscript preparation. Part 1. The Operative Emerges. Chapter 1. Who is Mr. Putin? On March 18, 2014, still bathed in the afterglow of the Winter Olympics that he had hosted in the Black Sea resort of Sochi, Russian President Vladimir Putin stepped up to a podium in the Kremlin to address the nation. Before an assembly of Russian officials and parliamentarians, Putin signed the documents officially reuniting the Russian Federation and the Peninsular Republic of Crimea, the home base of Russia's Black Sea Fleet. Crimea had seceded from Ukraine only 2 days earlier, on March 16th. The Russian president gave what was intended to be a historic speech. The events were fresh, but his address was laden with references to several centuries of Russian history. Putin invoked the origins of Orthodox Christianity in Russia. He referenced military victories on land and sea that had helped forge the Russian Empire. He noted the grievances that had festered in Russia since the 1990s, when the state was unable to protect its interests after the disintegration of the Soviet Union. At the center of his narrative was Crimea. Crimea has always been an inseparable part of Russia, Putin declared. Moscow's decision to annex Crimea was rooted in the need to right an outrageous historical injustice. That injustice began with the Bolsheviks, who put lands that Russia had conquered into their new Soviet Republic of Ukraine. Then, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev made the fateful decision in 1954 to transfer Crimea from the Russian Federation to Ukraine. When the Soviet state fell apart in 1991, Russian-speaking Crimea was left in Ukraine, like a sack of potatoes, Putin said. The Russian nation was divided by borders. Vladimir Putin's speech and the ceremony reuniting Russia with its lost province came after several months of political upheaval in Ukraine. Demonstrations that had begun in late November 2013 as a protest against Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych's decision to back out of the planned signing of an association agreement with the European Union soon turned into a large-scale protest movement against his government. By February 2014, protesters were engaged in clashes with Ukrainian police that left over 100 people dead on both sides. On February 21, 2014, talks between Yanukovych and the opposition were brokered by outside parties, including Russia. A provisional agreement intended to end the violence and pave the way for new presidential elections at the end of 2014 was upended when Yanukovych abruptly fled the country. After several days of confusion, Yanukovych resurfaced in Russia. Meanwhile, the opposition in Ukraine formed an interim government and set presidential elections for May 25, 2014. At about the same time that Yanukovych left Ukraine, unidentified armed men began to seize control of strategic infrastructure on the Crimean Peninsula. On March 6, the Crimean parliament voted to hold a snap referendum on independence and the prospect of joining Russia. On March 16th, the results of that referendum indicated that 97% of those voting had opted to unite with Russia. It was this referendum that Putin used to justify Russia's reincorporation, its annexation of Crimea. He opened his speech with a reference to the referendum and how more than 82% of eligible voters had turned out to make this momentous and overwhelming choice in favor of becoming part of Russia. The people of Crimea had exercised their right, the right of all nations, to self-determination. They had chosen to restore the unity of the Russian world and historical Russia, but by annexing the Crimean Peninsula immediately after the referendum, Putin had dealt the greatest blow to European security since the end of the Cold War. In the eyes of most external observers, Putin's Russia was now a definitively revisionist power. In a short span of time, between February 21st and March 18, 2014, Russia had moved from brokering peace to taking a piece of Ukraine. As Western leaders deliberated how to punish Putin for seizing Crimea and deter him from similar actions in the rest of Ukraine and elsewhere, questions arose. Why did Putin do this? What does he want? Many commentators turned back to questions that had been asked nearly 15 years earlier, when Vladimir Putin first emerged from near obscurity to become the leader of Russia. Who is Mr. Putin? For some observers, the answer was easy. Putin was who he had always been, a corrupt, avaricious, and power-hungry authoritarian leader. What Putin did in Ukraine was just a logical next step to what he had been doing in Russia since 2000, trying to tighten his grip on power. Annexing Crimea and the nationalistic rhetoric Putin used to justify it were merely ploys to bolster his flagging public support and distract the population from problems at home. Other commentators saw Putin's shift toward nationalist rhetoric and his decision to annex Crimea as evidence of new imperial thinking and as dangerously genuine. Putin's goal, they proposed, was to restore the Soviet Union or the old Russian Empire. But if that was true, where were the patterns and key indicators of neo-imperialist revisionism in Putin's past behavior? Many world leaders and analysts wondered what they had missed. Unable to reconcile their old understanding of Putin with his behavior in Ukraine, some concluded that Putin himself had changed. A new Putin must have appeared in the Kremlin. If, in fact, Putin's behavior in the Ukraine crisis was really different from the past, it could provide an opportunity to understand him better. In his 2014 book, A Sense of the Enemy, The High-Stakes History of Reading Your Rival's Mind, Zachary Shore argues that it is precisely when people break with previous patterns of behavior that we can begin to gain an understanding of their real character. Patterns of past behavior are a poor predictor of how a person will act in the future. Contexts change and alter people's actions. Pattern breaks are key for analyzing individual behavior. They push us to focus on the invariant aspects of the person's self. They help reveal the hidden drivers, the underlying motivations, and what an actor, a leader, values most. This is the essence of our approach in this book. The book is an effort to figure out who Mr. Putin is in terms of his motivations, what drives him to act as he does. Rather than present a chronicle of events in which Putin played a role, we concentrate on events that shaped him. we look at formative experiences of Putin's past.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?